Usakasa Yukuno. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you guys my ancestry timeline from my 23andme DNA report. I'm also going to be reading you guys a couple of citations from a few articles that I read, which I'm going to be sharing with you guys in the description down below so you can check it out and read for yourself. And I'm going to start off by saying anybody can learn about this. It's important that we be objective and logical. There are plenty of people that talk about this, whether on social media and YouTube, not just me. So we shouldn't be making silly comments. It's important that we be scientific, learned, and grounded, okay? Because this is great for all of us to learn. We don't have to have a degree to talk about this. So I'm going to start off by reading the first quote here, okay? And this is from the article Taino and African Maternal Heritage in the Greater Antilles, okay? It says, an explanation for these discrepancies may reside in the history of the 5 island nations after the initial contact by Europeans. The European colonies of Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico started similarly, shortly after the 4 initial landings by Columbus. That is, Spain commenced in its intense search for gold in the Greater Antilles at the end of the 15th century, enslaving and forcing the indigenous populations to perform hard labor as part of the encomienda systems established by the Spanish crown intended to Christianize the natives. This resulted in the almost complete annihilation of the Taino people. 50 years, mainly from plagues, cruel forced labor, and conflicts. Okay, so this recent article, which was published in 2017, it says it was previously thought that the Tainos were completely wiped out, okay? It says that they were almost completely annihilated, all right? So this is important when I talk about my ancestry timeline. The Spanish colonists / fortune hunters likely utilized male individuals for their mining projects, while the women and children performed household duties such as cleaning and cooking. Considering that most of the initial migrants from Spain were males, it is likely they married Taino women shortly after their arrival, giving them their family names and creating stable households. An official survey established that by 1514, barely 2 decades after the first contact, about 40% of the Spanish colonists had married Taino women. The actual numbers of mixed Spanish-Taino families were broadly higher. Compared to other Europeans, Spaniards tended to have a more relaxed attitude to establishing families with Taino women. It is feasible that Spain's multiracial history of autochthonous populations, including Celts, Arabs, Berbers, Sub-Saharan Africans, and Jewish cohabitating in the Iberian Peninsula for centuries, provided a more tolerant view on mixed marriages. So you're going to look at my you're going to look at my ancestry timeline from my 23andme DNA report. You can see that my timeline reflects this history, okay? The second point, first native pre-Columbian populations suffered dramatic population bottlenecks. Now you see that it used this instead of using the term extinction, okay? This is very important. Soon after contact. This poses a challenge for reconstructing population genetic history because of Extent, admixed populations have retained a limited proportion of the native genetic lineages. You see in my ancestry timeline, the native is all the way in the bottom. So this reflects that I had a native ancestor that mixed in with the last migrants that came into the Caribbean, which would be the European and the African. Another good reference for this, which I previously talked about, is Basil A. Reed and Samuel Wilson. A population bottleneck or genetic bottleneck is a sharp reduction in the size of a population due to environmental events such as famines, earthquakes, floods, fire, disease, droughts, or human activities. Okay, and this is what you see on my timeline. It reflects that. Had I been a pure native, my ancestral timeline would look totally different. All right. So if any of you guys have took a test with 23andme, your ancestral timeline is going to reflect that. Okay. If you are of Boricua, Dominican, or Cuban descent, because we have a shared demographic history. Genome-wide data also affords reconstruction of population processes shaping genetic composition of people with a complex demographic history. By comparing DNA sequences, geneticists can not only reconstruct relationships between different populations or species, but also infer evolutionary history over deep time scales. So you see the timeline reflects that. Nat Geo and Ancestry, they don't have this. This is why I like 23andMe, because it's more comprehensive. I first did mines with Nat Geo, and then the second one I did was with 23andMe. From a genetic perspective, Latinos are descended from Indigenous American, European, and African populations. Although Latinos have been considered to be first and foremost an ethnic group, they represent a heterogeneous mix of Native American, European, and African ancestry. Heterogeneous means diverse in character or content. Admixture results in the introduction of new genetic lineages into a population. This is what you see on my timeline. Hispanics are a heterogeneous group with varying genetic ancestry. These differences may be due in part to differences in genetic ancestral components. All right, so now my native timeline, it starts from the bottom up, okay? I have first the native in the bottom, North African, then African hunter-gatherer, Southern East African, Senegambian and Guinean, British and Irish, then Italian, then Spanish and Portuguese, then Angolan and Congolese, then Nigerian, and then last Ghanaian and Liberian. Okay. Interesting to know, I found out the other day, my sister took a test with 23andMe, and looking at it, it's similar to my results from 23andMe, and my grandparents. With that, the native is in the bottom, and then everything else after is very similar, which is very deep, and it makes me more intrigued to learn about DNA. So let me know what you think. I would also like to know, again, with you guys, if you guys took a test with 23andMe, what does it say the last time you had a native ancestor? For me, it says 1710, roughly. For my sister, 1720. for my grandparents, 1640. Okay, so this is all for today. Look at this with an open mind. Check out the links down below so you can read for yourself and come to your own conclusions. And until the next build, Wahiba.